Ever feel like you're barely keeping up with the big stuff happening in the world? Like all
Mm.
those changes in money and trade that we hear about?
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, we are diving into a pretty crucial moment today.
Okay.
It's an upcoming deadline.
Mm.
And this one has the potential to really shake things up
Oh,
between how the U.S. and India work together on, business.
I see. Yeah.
It all comes down to April 2nd.
April 2nd. Okay.
That's when things could shift, right? Big time
All right.
when it comes to tariffs.
Yeah.
So for this deep dive, we've been looking into what's behind this deadline.
Right.
What are the real disagreements here?
Yeah.
What's driving these potential actions?
Mm.
And I think most importantly for you listening, what could the consequences be?
Okay. Yeah.
Beyond just the headlines.
Sure.
We want to get to the heart of the matter, the why behind this looming date.
Right. So beyond just sort of like the surface level stuff.
Exactly.
Get into the nitty gritty.
Yeah.
And you know what's really interesting about this?
Yeah.
It's almost like there's this really theatrical language around it.
Oh, really?
You hear terms like Liberation Day being tossed around,
Oh,
which, immediately it frames it in a very particular light.
right.
And then you look at how differently the two countries are approaching tariffs right now.
Yeah.
And you realize that India is kind of walking a tightrope here,
Oh, interesting.
trying to balance
Yeah.
its own needs with what this major trading partner wants.
Right, right. It's a tough position to be in.
Absolutely, yeah.
Well, let's start with that April 2nd date
Okay,
and that term,
right.
Liberation Day. Now, this didn't come from some neutral third party. This is a
Oh.
phrase that former President Trump used.
Oh, okay.
And the key for you listening is understanding what he meant by liberation when we're talking about trade.
Right. So in the context of trade,
Exactly.
when Trump used the term Liberation Day, he was basically talking about breaking free from what he saw as these unbalanced trade deals, where other countries were kind of, in his opinion, taking advantage of the U.S. with high tariffs.
Yeah.
It was about the U.S. kind of shaking off those disadvantages
Right.
and going towards a system he thought was more, equitable.
Yeah.
A very America First view of how international trade should work.
Yeah, so liberation for the U.S., but I'm guessing in India, this April 2nd deadline probably isn't met with quite the same enthusiasm.
No, not quite.
I mean, for some sectors there, it could feel more like an, oh no, we're doomed day.
Right, yeah. If these tariffs actually go into effect, it's a real possibility. Think about Indian companies, the ones that send a lot of their products to the U.S.
Yeah.
These new tariffs, they would basically become more expensive overnight.
Right, just like that.
And that could lead to, fewer sales. They might lose their place in the market, and
Yeah.
it could really squeeze their profits.
Right, that makes sense.
Not a good situation.
And this isn't just a one-off thing, right? We've seen these kinds of moves from the U.S. before. Remember when they put tariffs on aluminum and steel
Right.
from places like Mexico, Canada, and China? What happened then?
Oh, those earlier tariffs, they definitely made waves. It made everyone nervous about, a potential trade war.
Yeah.
And within the U.S., there was worry about costs going up for businesses.
Right, the ones that rely on imported materials.
Yeah, exactly. It was a pretty clear sign that the U.S. was willing to use tariffs as a big tool in trade talks.
It's a powerful tool, that's for sure.
Yeah.
So let's focus on India specifically now. What has Trump actually said about their tariffs as we get closer to April 2nd? What's his main point?
He's been pretty straightforward, actually. He's said publicly that he expects India to lower its tariffs on stuff coming from the U.S. by a lot.
Okay.
And he directly connected that to this April 2nd deadline,
Right.
saying if those tariffs don't go down, the U.S. will put its own tariffs on things coming from India. Like, it was a very clear if this, then that scenario.
Yeah. It's a little confusing, though, right? Because he's also talked about having a very good relationship with Prime Minister Modi.
Right, yeah.
It's like you have this friendly connection on one hand, and then you're calling them out on tariffs on the other.
Yeah.
So for our listeners, I think this shows how personal diplomacy and actual trade negotiations can be totally different things.
Exactly. You can be buddies, but when it comes down to economic goals and trade imbalances, those can take priority. What
Yeah.
this shows is that the U.S. is mainly focused on what they see as rebalancing trade,
Right.
making it work more in their favor.
Yeah, regardless of who they're friends with.
Exactly. Relationships are one thing, but the bottom line is another.
Okay, well, let's look at the actual numbers on these tariffs,
Right.
because that's a big part of this whole discussion.
Definitely.
Trump points out that India's average tariff rate is about 17%.
17%.
while the U.S. is at just 3.3%,
Hmm.
China at 2.35%,
Okay.
and the EU even lower at 1.39%.
Yeah, those are pretty big differences when you put them side by side.
So, for our listeners trying to understand all of this, is Trump right? Based just on these numbers, does he have a point?
If we just look at the numbers,
Yeah.
then yeah,
Okay.
the difference is definitely there.
Yeah.
India's average tariffs are a lot higher.
Right.
So statistically speaking, calling India a high tariff nation is accurate.
Okay. But I get the feeling there's more to the story here.
Huh?
There's got to be a reason why India has these higher tariffs.
Right.
It's not just a random choice.
Exactly. It's not just a number plucked out of thin air.
Yeah.
To understand how India decides its tariffs, we have to go back to its economic development after independence.
Okay.
Back then, under Nehru's socialist policies, the focus was on growing their own industries.
Hmm.
You know, the ones that were just starting out.
Right.
High tariffs were seen as this crucial protection, shielding these new businesses from being crushed by international competition.
Yeah.
That was already well established.
Yeah, that makes sense.
The goal was to build an economy that could rely on itself.
Right. So for our listeners, the original idea behind these tariffs was to give homegrown industries a chance to actually grow
Yeah,
and become competitive,
right?
like giving a young plant some shelter so it can handle a storm later on. But the question now is, has that shelter been there for too long?
That's exactly the debate. Some Indian industries have definitely matured.
Yeah.
They're big players globally now.
Right.
But there are still millions of small and medium-sized businesses.
Okay.
The MSMEs.
The SMEs.
These are the backbone of the Indian economy.
Right. In terms of jobs?
Exactly. They provide so many jobs, but they often don't have the size, the tech, or the money to go head-to-head with huge international companies.
Yeah. If tariffs were suddenly gone.
It'd be like David versus Goliath in so many industries.
Yeah.
Imagine, like, your local bakery suddenly having to compete with some massive global food corporation
Yeah.
on price and everything.
Right. It's not a fair fight.
It's a tough battle, yeah.
That's a good way to put it. So the U.S., with its much bigger and older economy, they can handle lower tariffs. But India is still at a point where some protection is seen as essential.
Exactly. It's about protecting their own businesses,
Yeah.
especially those smaller ones.
Right.
And that difference, you know, where they are in their economic development, how their industries are structured.
Yeah.
That's a big source of tension here. What the U.S. sees as unfair barriers, India sees as necessary
Right.
to keep growing.
To safeguard their economy.
Exactly.
Now, when the U.S. brought up these concerns, India's response wasn't as aggressive
No.
as we've seen from some other countries.
Right.
They seem to be going the diplomacy route,
Yeah.
more kind of gentle approach. How
Yeah.
does that actually work?
They've definitely been more cautious and diplomatic
Okay.
compared to like Mexico, Canada, or China.
Yep.
Those countries basically fought back right away.
Right.
India seems to be trying to negotiate a bigger trade deal while making some concessions along the way,
Okay.
hoping to calm things down,
Right.
avoid those widespread tariffs.
Right, those big sweeping tariffs.
Yeah.
And we did see some of those concessions
Yeah.
right before Prime Minister Modi visited the U.S.
Mm.
What exactly did they offer?
They made some moves,
Yep.
like getting rid of customs duties on some life-saving drugs and lowering tariffs on certain raw materials,
Well,
like cobalt, lithium-ion battery waste. Those are important for tech.
Yeah.
And a few other minerals, too. They were probably trying to show they were willing to address some of the U.S. concerns.
Okay, build some goodwill.
Exactly. Try to smooth things over a bit.
But it sounds like the U.S. didn't think those gestures were enough.
Yeah, it seemed like they saw them as kind of small, not really tackling the core issues.
Right,
Their focus was on the bigger picture.
right. That trade imbalance.
Exactly. That big number, around $130 billion.
Huge.
Yeah.
And the overall higher tariff rates.
Yeah, across many different goods.
It seems like the U.S. might have more reasons for focusing on India right now. Do you think, and this is for you listening too, that Trump might be looking for a foreign policy win? You know, with all the other complicated stuff going on in the world,
Yeah.
getting some big trade concessions from a major economy like India.
Right.
That would be a good headline for him.
That's a sharp observation.
Hmm.
In the world of global politics, domestic issues often drive foreign policy decisions.
Yeah.
Things happening at home influence what happens on the world stage. Getting a good trade deal, or even just making it look like you got a good deal, that could be a big win back home.
Right.
Reinforce that image of strong leadership.
Yeah, that you're a tough negotiator.
Exactly, that you can get things done on a global level.
Okay, so let's imagine India actually does lower tariffs
All right.
a lot in key sectors like electronics,
Hmm.
medical equipment, chemicals, textiles, even alcohol.
Wow.
What would that actually look like in India?
Well, the first thing you'd probably see is a huge influx of imports
Okay.
from the U.S.
Right, into the Indian market.
Yeah, across all those sectors you just mentioned, American companies would have a much easier time selling their stuff in India.
Right, and it would be cheaper for them too.
Exactly. And for Indian consumers,
Yeah.
this could mean more options to choose from
Hmm.
and potentially lower prices,
Okay.
which at first glance might seem like a good thing.
Right.
More choices, lower prices. Who wouldn't want that?
But what about India's own industries
Ah, there's the catch.
and that whole push for Atmanirbharta?
Right, self-reliance.
Yeah.
How would that be affected?
That's where things get complicated. If you significantly reduce tariffs, you're basically exposing Indian manufacturers to a lot more competition
Okay.
and much tougher competition.
Yeah.
Many of these businesses in India, they're growing,
Yeah.
they're developing,
Right.
but they might not be at the same level as their American counterparts, right, in terms of size, efficiency, technology.
Exactly. So the worry is they'd have a hard time competing.
Hmm.
Could lead to fewer sales, businesses shutting down.
Right, job losses.
Yeah, all of that,
Mm.
which would go against that whole idea of self-reliance.
It undermines it completely.
It really does.
You used a really good analogy earlier about Indian leather and textile businesses
Yeah.
going up against U.S. manufacturers. You said it was like a water gun versus a naval battle.
Oh, yeah, that.
Can you explain that a little more?
Sure. Picture a small business in India making leather goods.
Okay.
They don't have a ton of money.
Right.
Maybe they're using older methods. Now they have to compete with a big American company that has all the latest machines, tons of marketing power, and they sell their products all over the world.
Yeah.
Even if the Indian product is good quality,
Right.
just the difference in size and resources puts them at a disadvantage.
Mm.
Lowering tariffs basically takes away that protection.
Yeah. Makes it a lot harder.
So that smaller company with fewer resources is going to be really tough for them to survive.
Right. So this Make in India thing,
Yeah.
which is all about boosting their own production, could actually end up helping America sell more in India
Ironic, isn't it?
if they lower those tariffs too much.
The idea and the result could be totally different.
Yeah.
The whole point of Make in India is to make the country a global manufacturing hub,
Right.
producing great stuff
Right.
for India and for export.
Yeah.
But if it ends up just making it easier for foreign companies to sell their products in India, well, that changes the whole purpose.
Yeah.
And then you have to ask who's really benefiting from this.
Right. Exactly. Okay. So India's in a tough spot here,
Definitely.
facing this April 2nd deadline
Yeah.
and this very real possibility of tariffs. What are their options?
What can they actually do?
Yeah.
Well, it seems like they have three main choices.
Okay.
Option one, they stand their ground.
Okay. Hold firm.
Don't give in on tariffs
Right.
and hope the U.S. backs down.
Run.
Or doesn't actually follow through with the threats.
All right. A gamble.
Given everything that's been said and what's happened before,
Yeah.
this seems pretty risky.
Right.
Probably wouldn't go over well with the U.S.
Makes sense. What's the second option?
Okay, option two, they offer more concessions.
Okay. Compromise more.
Hoping it'll be enough to satisfy the U.S. and avoid those tariffs. The problem is, how do you know how much is enough?
Right. Good point.
And you could end up just giving and giving.
Yeah. Constantly making concessions.
Exactly, without any guarantee that it'll actually solve anything.
And it could just keep going.
Exactly, they keep asking for more.
It becomes a cycle. Okay. And what's the third option? Could India get a little more assertive?
Oh, so option three, playing hardball,
Yeah.
taking a tougher stance in the negotiations,
Right. Push back a little.
maybe threaten their own retaliatory measures,
Hmm.
put tariffs on U.S. goods, or try to get stronger support from like international trade organizations
Yeah.
to intervene. The big question is, does India have the power to do that?
Right. Can they actually counter the U.S.?
It's a tough call.
Mhm.
You have to weigh the power dynamics
Yeah.
and the potential fallout.
Right.
What could happen if it backfires?
It's high-stakes game. So we're at this critical point.
Definitely feels that way.
It's like a standoff
Mm.
where both sides have to think carefully
Yeah.
before April 2nd.
Before that deadline hits.
This really shows how complicated international trade is.
It really
It
is.
goes way beyond simple ideas of what's fair or unfair when it comes to tariffs.
Absolutely. It's so much more nuanced than that.
Right. There are good arguments on both sides.
Yeah.
The U.S. wants what they see as a level playing field.
Right. They want to even things out.
India needs to protect its industries that are still developing,
Yeah.
advance its own goals of self-reliance, while also facing this pressure to open up its markets more.
Right. It's a tricky balance.
Whatever happens, the decisions made will have real effects
Oh, absolutely.
on businesses and people in both countries.
For sure.
It makes you wonder what April 2nd will actually mean.
Yeah.
Will it be Liberation Day for global trade, at least from one perspective?
Right.
Or could it be the start of like a more protectionist world?
Yeah, with more and more tension between major economies.
And what would that mean for our interconnected world?
That's the big question, isn't it? What happens here could have a ripple effect.
Yeah.
Change how countries negotiate trade in the future and the overall direction of global economic policy.
So for everyone listening, this is definitely something to watch.
Absolutely. Keep an eye on it.
Stay informed about what's happening with these trade negotiations.
Yeah, in the coming weeks.
Think about how these changes, even indirectly, might affect your own industries, the products you buy, the economy in general. This is a story that's still unfolding.
It's not over yet. We'll see what happens.
Exactly.